Order. So here we are, Nick. I think you asked what should we talk about next time round, and I wasn't too sure, but actually I think the sequence of events and the reality that's taking place does actually drive the need to have these types of discussions to get to the bottom of it. And I just noticed today that Munich, there's someone in Munich who's been shot attacking Israeli targets. So this situation is really very real. So I'm really keen that. And I thought actually maybe we might talk about Britishness next time round, because that's an interesting challenge, trying to figure out what on earth that is, because there's a lot of things we take for granted and until they get attacked, you're not quite sure what you had in the first place, if you know what I mean. So
exactly. And our first discussion was received extremely well online. Tens of thousands of people watched it.
Fantastic. Yeah, good. Well, that's really encouraging, isn't it? So let's keep up the good work. And so today I thought what we could talk about was where's the UK heading and what's driving it, and then talk a bit more about what the solutions might be to this. So if that's all right with you, over to you. You kick off, and I'll share my view. Let's do the same thing and sort of try and wrap it up at the end.
I think we've been on the same path now since the end of the Second World War. Slowly but surely, we've been turning into a socialist state. We had a hiccup in the 80s. It was called Thatcher. But apart from that, it's been the same path we've been traveling down. Bigger states, more interference, more government programs, less personal responsibility, less rights that are important, but more meaningless rights.
Yep.
And that's the road we've been going down. And this government now is carrying on that journey. They didn't cause these problems. No, I keep hearing people saying it's all because of Labour. They've only been in power 50, 60 days. It's all Labour. This has got nothing to do really with this Labour government now. They're just carrying on the agenda that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And what is surprising is most people are quite happy going along with it and always have been happy going along with it. Something happened at the beginning of last century that changed the British people, that changed the English psyche. I wrote an article last year about the two world wars, maybe losing the bravest, the best men of the country damaged us genetically, damaged us socially and emotionally, turned us a little bit more to cowardice and wanting to be protected. We didn't pass on those traits because the good men had all died. If you're in a battle, who are the men more likely to take the risk to charge that machine gun nest? It's the brave men. And obviously, the least brave you are, the more likely to be a little bit slower running, or being behind someone else. So that could be one of the reasons. But we just look what we're willing to accept now. We're willing to accept the state kicking men out of family homes because we offer the women more money. Men accept being kicked out the home because they've got less responsibility, don't have to pay for their children being raised. They allow someone else. They allow other men to raise their children. If we had to pick up one thing about why we're failing, it's because of weak men, and weak men allow other men to raise their children. And I don't know what the answer to this is. I think the only answer I can see is we have to get to rock bottom before the country changes. And I was hoping for a Labour government because I know Labour government will take us to rock bottom quicker. Because the Tories were taking us to the same destination and have been over 14 years. But Labour will do it quicker. So praise to Labour. Let's get to rock bottom, and then maybe we can rebuild our country into something better than it is now, because what it is at the moment, nobody wants. I mean, have you met anybody who praises our country now, who wants, for people who are born here? I know migrants are still coming because it's still better than where they're coming from. But any English person now, all they have is criticisms of their own country. Nobody wants this, but no one has the fight. No one has the courage to do anything about it. We just accept that this is the way it is. And if I have one more Englishman telling me he's leaving the country, that he's going to emigrate to Poland or Lithuania because they've got a better culture now,
Yeah.
because of immigration, because of this. And I keep saying to them, you're just like an African immigrant, aren't you? You're running away from your country, from your responsibility. You're abandoning your people, your family, your relatives for you to have a better life. But don't forget, this nonsense will eventually overtake Lithuania, Poland, and you'll have those fights again in a couple of decades. The time to fight is now,
Yeah.
and the place to fight is here.
Mm. Yeah. Fantastic. And yeah, I think there's something about bravery and courage which is really important. There are people, if you look at the way the UN sort of came to light, what was driving the First and Second War, there are people who think there's a justifiable case for those wars to basically trash the British, which were a very strong nation, and basically take out the courageous people. Because I think in any society, there's people that are always willing to stick their head above the parapet than everybody else, you know. And Yeah, and I think that really defines Britishness. I mean, huge courage. I mean, I remember. Now, you even look at the sports we play, like rugby. Rugby's a bloody brutal game, you know.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that. I mean,
Yeah.
what
And if you
I'd,
talk, you just mentioned rugby, let me give you another example on that rugby.
yeah,
The Americans like rugby, but what did they do? They covered themselves in pads because they didn't want to get hurt,
yeah, yeah,
and helmets
yeah.
because that's how brutal rugby is. Other nations look at it and go, "We want to play that, but we want to play a softer version."
I know, I know. And actually, if you look at my nose, you know, if I look straight, you can see it's well, and it's
Mm.
been broken 5 times playing rugby. And in fact, to give you an idea of the level of sympathy I had from my mother, which she said to me, "When you break it the 6th time, then get it sorted out." And I never broke it 6 times, so my nose remains the same. And I think you know, you know, there's something about our childhoods as well, Nick, as well, that makes us what we are.
Mm.
And Yeah, I mean, it's what I'd add to what you just said. I think it's absolutely critical. I think there's something about courage here which is really vital, which I'll touch on. I think it's really interesting to say we have to hit rock bottom before we move forward. So, I mean, that really is, you know, my experience of company turnaround. The difficulty with company turnaround versus country turnaround, let's say, and complete collapse is that the insolvency laws are pretty clear on company turnaround, Nick. So if you're
Mm.
insolvent and you carry on trading, you can go to prison for uh for trading to the detriment of creditors. And the shortest
Mm.
time that anyone's done that is in fact 10 days, interesting enough. So having joined the company, but in you know, when it comes to nationhood or countries, they can pretty much do what they want to do. There isn't that predicament insolvent that definition of insolvency where the modus
Mm.
operandi changes. And frankly, countries can print money, and you know, do what frankly they're doing at the moment, what we're witnessing with the Labour Party. So um, I I love that though. I love your pragmatism, you know, rock bottom. I My concern, which I'd like to touch on, is why do I think we might not get out of rock bottom? I think there may be a bit of a trap, which is a bit different. And I I've gone to great lengths, not not just to sort of accept the equity, diversion, inclusion type stuff, but really understand the history and what gave rise to that. And actually, there are people like John Money who really need to be understood, really evil people that actually founded these dreadful sorts of organizations. And I think it's really important during this process, you know, in terms of maintaining strength, not to sell our souls, Nick, which is very much a Christian belief, but I'm sure it resonates with you as a good man as well. You know, not to sell your soul because your soul is your most valuable thing, which is defined really what comes out of your mouth and you doing what matters to you and what you think is right, as opposed to getting dragged along with the masses. So I've noticed personally that Christians as well have got the strength, you know, who are actually the sort of Solzhenitsyn type people sticking their heads above the parapet largely. And I think the first thing I'd say that is in terms of causing this particular issue is basically trashing the basic tenets of society in the UK, which are you touched on family. I'd touch on, you know, some the basic truth, what's male and female, and that's a fundamental truth which gender ideology obviously destroys. And the problem with untruths is it just creates an ever cycle of lies, and you need more sophisticated lies to maintain them. And then, of course, the problem gets greater. And I think that's in part why you were talking about, why does it's not a left or a right problem? Because the problem, I'm the sort of person who is always taking on big challenges. I'm not afraid of it. And I think you are as well. You've put
Mm.
your head in the lion's mouth for some reason as well, too. But actually, it's much easier not to do that, Nick. Let's face it. And most of
Yeah.
my friends, when I go to the pub, they don't think like me. They're thinking much more about what can I do to improve my little world and they don't really care about these issues so much. I think there's an issue around Britishness, which I think let's explore that in a bit more detail. But there's something about basic politeness. Queuing's a weird British thing,
Mm.
which is the way we engage with people. If you pass someone in the street, you expect to acknowledge, that sort of thing, which are quite unique to the UK. Nationhood, I think, is vital as well, because that unites us. And I think as a nation in the UK, we are incredibly tolerant is a very awful word, but we are very graceful. Graceful is a far better word, which means you can put the past behind you and speak to somebody without animosity, let's say,
Mm.
which I think is a British trait. And I think the symbol of rejecting Britishness is very disturbing. And that there's a survey recently which said that there's been a 20% drop from 86% to 66%.
Mm.
But in fact, it's 6% of young people actually don't like the UK. And so if they are the future, exactly if we are, let's say, defining what British is, and 60% of the youth completely disagree with that, that's obviously not a great advert for you know, whatever
Mm.
Britishness is, if that's part of a solution. So I think the other thing I'd add is this is actually all of this stuff. Unfortunately, when I look at this more broadly, it's a decoy. What we're actually talking about is a decoy for a bigger agenda, which is all around the UN 2030 agenda, which is just frankly hell. It's a
Mm.
dystopian hell, which includes 15-minute cities, and there's lots of stuff people don't understand. So for example, 15-minute. There are counties or whatever jurisdictions in the UK or boroughs, local councils have got legislation passed to impose 15-minute cities in the UK for climate emergency. Not
Mm.
many people know that. Not many people know as well that their entire assets, shares, money, and all the rest of it has already been handed to another entity, and we've only got it at our discretion. Not many people really have thought through central bank digital currencies, and then the steps to get there, like you know, crypto, and people think that's a sort of decoy. Um, and I think as well, a lot of this stuff is a real fraud. We talked about lack of truth, but I think a lot of it's a real fraud of Christianity. I think a lot of this wokeness is around a corrupt version of Christianity around compassion,
Mm.
corrupt compassion. Um, but I mean, the Christianity's got various tenets. One is good, and so you know, celebrating things which are fundamentally don't warrant merit, like that Australian breakdancer, for example, in the Olympics, which I actually, as soon as I saw the opening ceremony, I actually I vetoed the Olympics, but
Yeah.
I picked up some of the fallout. That breakdancer who was the perfect victim who deserved no merit whatsoever. In fact, in our day, we would have been told, "Crap, Nick, that was crap, Nick. Go and do
Yeah.
something else." And you'd have to take that on board because there wasn't really an option, I think, to not to not to face your own truth. And I think a lot of our own sanity is defined by that type of engagement, Nick. Maybe not quite so impolite, but that type of engagement. In fact, I think there's something interesting about the Harris situation, which I touched on. But her first time round, she got completely shot down by the truth. If you remember Tulsi Gabbard, who I think she's one of the most fantastic women on many fronts, really
Mm.
truly extraordinary woman. She really cares, and she shot down Harris. But now, if you look at Harris now, she's surrounded by what I describe as being an echo chamber, a force field of lies, and they're all external lies, typical woke lies like Trump's this, Trump's that, Trump's a Nazi, he's the wreck democracy. Normally these things are exactly the opposite.
Mm.
So if it's anti-democratic, that means that she's actually portraying psychologically a worst fear.
Mm.
So I think there's a whole sort of bigger picture aspect to this. And I think there's said before, I think there's stuff that we take for granted, which is very difficult for us to get our heads around. What we take for granted, what we do automatically, is very difficult to get our heads around. And I think there's relative culturalism as well, which is a very damaging policy, which is this notion that every nation in its own right is okay. You just need to put them together. But of course, what that leads to is if every nation's okay with its own values and Islam and da 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 da, and that obviously isn't true, because the UK has got its own values, got its own truths, and of course, that's why we've got two-tier policing, because
Mm.
policing is actually going back to the formation of policing in the UK. It's consensual policing. And it has to be, because you very much rely on the public to have them on the right side. But of course, if you accept that Muslim communities don't integrate with anybody else intentionally, which I think is fairly true, if you look at Luton, they intentionally don't integrate. Then you have to have a policy for policing the Muslims versus anybody else, or any other tribe, be it British. And I think the level of victimhood we're facing at the moment justifies everything. So if you are not a victim, it's important to understand the psychology. This notion that Brits are now the bottom of the housing list, that is totally ridiculous, which I struggle. I mean, I just can't get my head around it. But when you understand the psychology around victimhood, that is consistent with victimhood.
Mm.
If you look at why are paedophiles and sex offenders being released from prison, and Brits who care, who are getting bent out of shape, who are acting out of character, to free up prison places, it's because of victimhood. This is the blind spot. So you're actually really fueling. Not only are you covering up evil, but actually really fueling evil. And the it's really important, I think, to understand the mechanism which I describe in my book, the mechanism of victimhood, scapegoat, and then terror. So now the scapegoats are the ones that get attacked. So the far right are the ones that get attacked. The Jews are the ones that got attacked in the 1930s, because of the scapegoat, and because of the scapegoating using language, corrupt
Yeah.
language. And this, Starmer himself has done this, labeling far right people as being far right. And so people do. What concerns me about this is I don't think Starmer's even aware of what he's doing. I think I don't know. Look, I mentioned this last time we spoke. I think he's in automatic mode. He's not thinking. He's reading scripts. You can see that he's just repeat. And if he gets any deviation from the script, he moves into attack mode.
Mm.
And if you look at the Marxism was quite clever, and the really interesting thing about Marx, and the reason why he was so influential, was not because he came up with a whole raft of ridiculous things. It was because he was very clever at warping dialogue, very clever at coming up with phrases like, and you can see this, like anti-racist. It's a double negative,
Mm.
right? Very difficult to get your head. What on earth is it? It assumes that you're racist in the first place. Therefore, anti-racist means you actually have to act it out. You actually have to look for it, which of course fuels racism. It's like, Black Lives Matter. You can't. No, what about everybody else? Then you get shot for that. You don't care.
Mm.
No, this anti-trans stuff, and this is all very corrupt language. So I go to great lengths to try and describe in the Winning Thinking program and make people aware of that stuff. And I think the other thing is the law as well. You can see this if you look at any law. Um, if you look at the UK law, you can basically get locked up for anything, Nick, for what you say.
Mm.
I mean, absolutely anything, and it's pretty much down to even as the law stand, you can get locked up for Islamophobia, let's say, or anti-Christian, although it's the way it's being applied. So we don't actually need an Islamophobia law because there are laws to protect faith currently.
Mm.
But you can see what's happened to Netanyahu. So authorities, I'm not particularly suggest. Well, I think there has been a massive corruption of UK, because of what I've tried to describe just now of UK law and the way it's applied. and the problem with that is it drives good people like you and me mad. And we don't operate well when we're angry.
Mm.
That's exactly the outcome they want to achieve. So that's the reason why I don't try and rationalize this stuff. I try to understand the psychology, because that's not, if you understand what's driving something, you can understand how bonkers it is, rather than try to rationalize it. In fact, when I do company turnaround, my team are trained in the winning thinking program to actually understand the psychology. So because people say these sorts of things in company turnarounds to justify stupid situations, and if you try and treat that face on without knowing how to address it, it drives good people nuts. You just think this is just ridiculous. No, your head just explodes with anger. So it's important to do that. But I think the current situation is quite worrying, because the more this goes on, I'm sort of trying to challenge your logic. Can you, well, please come back to me. The more this goes on, the bigger the challenge gets, Nick. So the
It
challenge
does.
doesn't
Mm.
get. Bear with me a moment. I'll just hold your thought for a second. But
No.
the bigger the challenge gets, the more. So that's more likely to make people sod if they're left wing or right wing, much more likely to become victims or whatever you might call them. Um, and it's much more difficult to face the facts as well. So you've got the swimming, that that great swimming legend who's a great pro supporter of women in sport, which is just
Shannon Davis.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And she very much adopts this. Her focus is on truth. In fact, she was speaking on Radio 4 this morning. I was listening to a dialogue, and you can't engage if there's no conversation to be had unless you value truth,
Mm.
Nick. We can't have a sensible conversation. We might not agree on what the truth is, but if you don't value the truth,
Mm.
just, I think that's um, and I think as well, there's this notion. I think in my book, I look at power. Power is very destructive, and the more powerful people become, they adopt this thinking of I know what's best for you, which is very much Starmer's view, and Gates and all these, and there's less check and balance on what they're thinking. I think the other thing is wisdom as well. There's look at what the Labour Party are doing. I think there's a real damage. There's a lack of wisdom. Um, so in terms of um, how to correct this, I think I mean free speech is absolutely critical. I think it's vital we get to know each other, and I enjoy these conversations. It's very important we have these discussions, if only just to get to know each other as well, to understand different views. And I think that said, though, there's a real disregard. So another antithesis of what you said, it's going to sort of get better. There's a lot of people in this country who've got a complete disregard for our values. So intentional. So the Islamic faith really do not regard our values at all. They're very anti what we're doing, and that's very contra to the position of nationhood and Britishness, which you and I care about. And I think the other thing which is difficult is that it's difficult to see who the adults are in charge, because one of the privileges I've got, I'm just a pretty ordinary bloke with courage, really. An engineer, I don't like bullshit. I was born in the Northeast, but apart from that, I'm a pretty ordinary person. But who are those people? And I can't see them sort of, well, I can't, actually, there's a few politicians, but they tend to get shafted. I actually think, and I'm willing to stick my neck out a bit, that Boris Johnson was actually quite a good bloke. And he got very unfairly labelled with various things. And actually, during that process, he became a sort of good bloke, but then he just fell to pieces during that process. Um, and he was under a lot of pressure. And I think on many things he performed moderately well. Um, so I think there's a challenge of good people, be it Farage, whoever. I'm not interested in precisely what you think of Farage or whatever, but will good people, whoever they are, have the ability to stick their head above the parapet and not, either get faced with violence. Because I mean, I've got a lot of time for Calvin Robinson, for example, who I think he's got, for a whole raft of different reasons, real clarity of thought, courage. But as you said before, he's left the country. Um, so um, I think you know at its simplest level, um, if we can't speak, Nick, it's
Mm.
almost like suicide of the person. If you can't speak, right, what you think, and you don't feel comfortable, that's basically you. Forget your body. That's basically you. And over a period of time, that's your soul destroyed, pretty much. So I think the level of severity here is pretty difficult. And I think the other tricky thing I think is that the longer this goes on, the more anything goes type thing. So we've got this notion of you know cultural relativism, but you've got the moral relativism as well. So you've got the Scottish police chap saying that paedophiles are just minor attracted people, which is just appalling thing to say.
Mm.
And actually, there's quite a few religious groups who will probably agree with that. And we need to have a way of setting these things in stone, and going back to those things, and almost like the sort of Ten Commandments of the UK, whatever the right thing is. And I don't see the person in the UK coming through the ranks to get to that place. I think a couple of last points. Technology is what maintains these bubbles. So I talked a bit about why is what concerns me again a bit to challenge your logic of when it collapses, right? If you look at what happened with Harris, she got shot down before, but I think this got more. I think this narrative control and bubble maintenance of Harris, who is utterly incompetent in my view. I'm not asking you to agree with that, by the way,
Mm.
but I'm more commenting around how I see the psychology. I think it's much more prevalent and people are much more vulnerable and much more easy to indoctrinate with these inflammatory lies and this narrative that Trump's a Nazi and non-democratic, blah blah, whatever the bloody list of things is. So that there's a distinct danger that the wrong people are coming to power. Albeit I'm pleased to see what's happening in Germany, in terms of they seem to be acting and kicking people out who don't fit. So, and I think I guess there's sort of two options here to sort of provoke the debate. Either we lie back and let the WF or whoever these evil globalists might be take over and drive us down into this dystopian wedge, which I'm absolutely. When I look at the psychology, I look at the consistency of the psychology, Nick, and there's consistency going on a very long time. Going back, I think, to what you were talking about, the Second World War and what the rise of the UN and all this stuff that's been going for a long time. The pharmaceutical related stuff, all the interests. If you follow the money as well as the psychology, you can see the patterns. So I think broadly there's a sort of choice. Either WF who've got extraordinary power and extraordinary wealth, or frankly, it's people like you and I moaning. And actually, I challenge myself on this because what do I do to actually fix this? What action am I specifically doing? I go to the occasional march, you know. Um, I, I do my absolute utmost to at every juncture to say what I think is truthful and right at my personal cost, if necessary, to preserve my
Mm.
soul, whatever that might mean. So I do my bit, but I don't feel as though I'm not coming up through the political ranks. Now you are, but I'm not. Um, and and I'm worried that we're creating an environment whereby good people, um, to a degree like Trump, good people is not a perfect person, by the way, but well-intended people. I think well-intended people um, are at danger of falling foul when you've got others who are, like Trudeau and this sort of WF. They're definitely all WF type stooges. Um, Starmer's another one. Harris is one. There's a whole list of them. Macron to a degree. Those people might come through. So that's what I'd like to challenge you with, if I may, for you to respond on in terms
Mm.
of will we get ourselves out of this mess?
First of all, it's far too much there for me to
Yeah, I know.
absorb, to think about, to comment on. There's just far too much there.
Yes. Yeah.
Let me pull out 1 or 2 points.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head when you started talking about queuing. And the reason why you hit the nail on the head there is because the English, the British, we value fair play.
Yes.
That's why we queue. We queue because we value fair play, treating people equally. You were here before me, therefore it's fair that you get served before me.
Yeah.
That's why we queue.
Yeah.
That's one of our traits as English British people. Our enemies, the people we disagree with, have used that trait against us for at least 50, 60, 70 years.
Very good point.
And because we want to be fair as a nation,
Yeah.
that's why British people at the bottom of the housing list now because, of course, a migrant from Nigeria or someone else fleeing war, famine, of course, they're in more need than us. It's only fair to privatise them above the needs of the British people. That's an automatic response from us. Turns out it's a wrong response, but
Oh,
they've used our fair play against
can I
us.
just respond to that point, Nick, if I may? Sorry, I don't cut you short on that one, but I I think I absolutely agree that fairness is British, totally and utterly.
Hmm.
Uh, but I think Starmer is anti-British, right? And so I think the reason for putting migrants, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have a place, they should in the housing queue, but whether or not they should be at the top of the housing queue, regardless of everything else, I think that's got much more to do with anti-Britishness and victimhood than it has got to do with Britishness.
It does, but
Do you understand?
that's how they got away with it.
Okay.
That's why
Yeah.
we've accepted it
Oh,
because
I see.
our sense of fair play.
Oh,
That's
okay.
how DEI and this woke nonsense. That's how it's got a hold mainly in the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
Is
So it's
because
corruption. You're talking about it's a corruption and a misnomer.
yeah of our instincts of fair play.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what they grasp. That they've used our trait, which
Yeah.
they perceive as a weakness, against us.
Yeah. I
So
think compassion. I'd add. I use the word compassion. I think corrupted compassion. And actually,
yeah,
suicidal empathy is the word that Sad Gad uses for that as well, isn't it?
in a minute, let's get into that.
Sorry, let me.
I
I
thought
won't
that
interrupt you,
was
Nick. You
great.
crack on
That
that bit.
was great what he mentioned the other day. I found that hit the spot. So the next thing is we need to look at when I said we need to hit rock bottom. So hitting rock bottom isn't the same as the destruction of the country. When I say hit rock bottom will be where the people decide is rock bottom. We decided the rock bottom was in 1979, was when we elected Thatcher. That was rock bottom. People wanted change.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're not at rock bottom because even though the country is slowly being destroyed and we're becoming poorer and more unhappy, it's still at an acceptable level at the moment. But
Okay.
when that declines to a certain level, which I don't know what that level will be,
Yeah.
the people then will have a change of heart, and that then will be defined as rock bottom, and they will demand change. They will demand improvements. Governments will fall, new leaders will come to the fore, new ideas will be promoted. When that happens, I don't know.
So
I'm
how do
also
you feel? How do you
uh,
feel on that, Nick? On that point at the moment, I can't really speak on behalf of
yeah.
everybody else. I mean, I feel well. I feel the trajectory of this is something I need to prevent happening. Um, that's my personal view. Do you feel like that, or how do you feel?
I don't think we can prevent hitting rock bottom. I think we're on a one
Yeah,
way
but
journey.
is your modus operandi to do what you can to um not subvert this? I mean, obviously peaceful. We're talking peaceful means, but
Yeah.
to subvert this trajectory that we've just been talking about.
No,
Or do you just let it happen? You reckon just let it happen?
I think it has to happen because if we don't let it happen, we will have decades and decades of where we are now.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why I want this to happen so then the country will change. Um, I want my journey at the moment isn't to stop this happening. My journey at the moment is to prepare the people for when this happens.
Okay.
So the turnaround will be quicker. Maybe rock bottom won't be as low as it could be if we prepare the people now because they will see what's happening and will hit rock bottom sooner, which isn't as low as it would have been. That's what I'm trying to
So
achieve
in
here.
that logic, if you just follow that through, it's therefore in our interest to do nothing, let it hit the bottom, and because that's going to be the fastest solution. So let Starmer hit the wall sooner rather than later, and let him do it.
I would say not to not do nothing, but not to stop Starmer taking us to rock bottom. So we can do things that are going to help the rebound. That's where I'm putting my energy. So
Okay.
rather than hitting rock bottom and then everybody else then going, right, we want change, but we've not thought about this. We don't know what we want. We don't know how to get it. Let's hit rock bottom. And then we have millions of people going, right, now everyone else has woken up. this is the journey we need to go on so we can
Right.
start rebuilding from day one.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that. That's something that's really become clear to me in your logic. Okay. And so that's a really good. Is there anything else you'd say in terms of, I'm fully aware of what your criticism, what it said is absolutely valid.
Yeah.
You know that in terms of what I shared with you. Is there anything else you'd respond
I think
to?
my final point would be I don't think people like Starmer and all that are anti-British. I don't think they're trying to destroy the country. I think their idea of the country and how it should be is the right idea. And I honestly believe they think they're going to improve the lives of everybody in this country. Same with the people in the WEF. All these people, there might be one or two psychopaths involved in this, but the vast majority of people are doing it for the right reason. They just happen to be wrong.
Yeah,
They think, and where they're wrong is in this bit now, they think they know better.
yeah,
They think they understand people better than anybody else.
yeah,
And what we must understand when it comes to people is nobody understands what people want and what people will do.
yeah,
We're always shocked with what people do. We always are.
yeah,
And that's the flaw in their plan. If we can do A and B, that will produce C, and C's utopia. And everyone who tries to do that and implement that has to use force and coercion, and
yeah,
it always leads to mass starvation and destruction and millions of deaths. It
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
matter who you are. That's where it always leads. And these people think they're better, and that's the flaw in their argument.
yeah. No, I mean, what concerns me about this is Starmer, and particularly Starmer, is he doesn't know what drives him. And so I absolutely agree, right, that he thinks he's doing the right thing. There's no doubt about that. But he has no means of any check and balance. His psychology is so fragile. He will not, and I think he's probably been like that for most of his life. I think the legal profession, police, this is narcissism, right? The police have unbelievable amounts of power, right? So if you get stopped by police, they can, customs have probably got more, but so these professions do tend to create narcissists, and they unfortunately attract and develop narcissism. So I think there's a possibility that he's been. So the chance of him changing is 5x nothing,
Mm.
um, and I think that worries me because he could lead us off a cliff quite easily because he doesn't. I mean, for me, I'll tell you what the winning thinking program looks like. What for me it looks like is, and I test this with leadership teams, Nick, and I say, so if the wind changes, right, in your world or my world, do we see the wind? I mean, it's, you know, and actually do we align strategy accordingly, right?
Mm.
Um, and I, and actually, what the way the winning thinking program works is by sharing a different perspective. So, if you're a narcissist, the first one is to actually put somebody else first and then action that, which is actually very difficult if you're a narcissist. For someone like you and I are looking out for other people in whatever broad sense
Mm.
or narrow sense, that's relatively easy. But for Starmer, he would just, and actually the guy I work with actually is bit more narcissistic. It doesn't mean that these people are wrong. It
Mm.
just means that. So I think there's about, can you step out into that place? Because if what you do in a crisis, Nick, is just look after yourself, there's no doubt about it that the whole thing's going to collapse. So I think
Yeah.
there's traits of Starmer which make him dangerous. Goodness knows what he'd be like if he's in a war. I mean, he's creating a bit of a war himself inadvertently without realizing it at the moment, let alone his ability to actually make decent judgments in really critical situations. I think actually, I mean, I'll tell you one thing I'd noticed. I was thinking, I've come across this. People like him will crack up because his modus operandi isn't robust. So if you think about it, Nick, if your whole modus operandi is if you respond to things that you don't like by just labeling them as being, this, that, the other,
Mm.
thinking the problem's going to go away, that's not a strategy. And he is so extreme on that front, it's extraordinary. So, um,
He's a manager, he's not a leader. So he's a
well,
manager. He's implementing
yeah,
other people's ideas, dreams, and visions
yeah,
because he has no ideas, dreams, and visions himself.
yeah,
He's just got a playbook. It might be the Marxist playbook. It'll
yeah,
be the elite's playbook that the Tories spent 14 years implementing. He's managing
Yeah.
this
He's an
playbook.
ideologue.
Yeah, exactly.
Ideology.
That's all
He's
he's
an
doing.
ideologue.
He's not a leader.
Ideology is really ideology is another thing which is really important to understand, because ideology creates generalizations which fuels lies. So
Mm.
if you have an ideology, if you believe that, I don't know, I can't think of a politically correct one that's not going to upset the audience, but but if you believe something that's untrue and you've always believed that, Nick, if someone challenges that, you're going to get very angry
Mm.
and you want to lock everybody up. And I think that's a large part of the problem we've got at the moment. And the problem is it's the good people that are getting locked up at the moment. So there's a real, right here, right now, Nick, there's a real threat to the good people, personal threat to being locked up, frankly.
There is, and those people need to accept that and be locked up, because I've got so many people saying to me, Nick, I'd like to fight back, but I can't afford to lose my job. I can't afford to be locked up. And it's like, well, that's the whole point of trying to fight back. If you want to fight
Yeah,
back risk-free, consequence-free, then you'll be waiting a long time for that fight, because that'll be a non-important fight.
I know.
We need patriots.
I know.
Freedom isn't free. Freedom is paid for by the blood of patriots.
I know. I was with the chief executive this week, earlier on this week, and uh, my LinkedIn account has just disappeared off the face of the earth, just vaporized, and I really don't care, to be honest. It just, it's a waste of time. I'm much keener on doing things face to face like this, or actually face to face, or doing proper business or whatever, than spending time on LinkedIn. But this guy said to me, this guy's a serious heavy hitter, right? He operates in turnaround investment situations, no shrinking violet. And he said to me, he said, I really love what you were posting. What's happened to your LinkedIn? I said, my account's gone. I said, well, why didn't you ever comment so and so? I won't mention his name, obviously. And he just, and so what are the consequences of you not commenting and just sort of leaving it to me? It's ridiculous, which is a bit like the Calvin Robinson logic of, and I'm quite worried, because as a Christian, I think we do need, let's say, good representation from in whichever community. And I don't if it's the Muslim community, if it's the Christian community, if it's whichever community, we need people who actually value the truth and value the sort and actually interested in fixing this problem rather than fueling it, if you know what I mean, or creating or standing and putting aside their ideology and saying, right, how can we fix this? How can we put what are the common denominators? Is it about putting the UK back together? Because you and I sort of, Nick, we're sort of assuming that the challenge is here at maybe that we want to fix the UK, yeah, which I think you talk about England rather than the UK, which I understand. But I think that isn't necessarily the common agenda for a lot of people. Yeah. So it's quite difficult to have that discussion to know, if I'm negotiating something, normally something like, let's get this company back on the rails, and let's get it creating cash, which is sort of can get behind, as an overall objective. But actually, what's the overall objective here? Is it getting the great British values back on the menu, sorting out the UK? Who's actually interested in doing that, given that fact that 60% of people in the UK, young people, are ashamed of the UK. Maybe not quite ashamed, a little bit too harsh. And there are a number of communities who actually don't share our values and want to replace our values with something completely different.
All these problems sound huge. I don't think they're as big as they seem. Young people will always rebel. So young people, we've had the punks. Young people are always rebelling, saying,
I certainly did, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And all children, all young people across the world do this about their host nation. So I wouldn't worry about young people. Most of the communities in our country want England to be successful. How that looks and how that's defined a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
We've let most migrants down in this country by allowing them to bring their failed culture into this country and never forcing them to integrate or assimilate or to reject parts of their ancestral culture. We allowed them to do that. There's many people in those communities who would love to reject the old homeland communities, but are not supported by government or us to do it. And they're just as afraid of the nutcases in their communities as we are. If we could get a strong leader with a backbone, could fix many of these problems. Part of it is mass deportation. for people who are not born here, for people who've only arrived in the last 10 years, for any foreign criminal who commits any offence should be deported and barred for good.
Yeah.
There's lots of things we can do. We're just not at a stage yet where the people would accept that, and we've got politicians who would do that.
Yeah.
We've been in many, many, many worse situations than we are today.
Yeah.
If we look historically, you know, the world power in the 1600s tried to invade us 3 times with the Spanish armadas. We managed to beat them. Napoleon conquered Europe, one of the greatest emperors, tacticians ever to exist. We beat him.
Yeah.
Hitler, biggest nutcase in the world, conquered everybody in weeks.
Yeah.
We beat him. We stood alone against Europe and him, and we stood fast. Most people wanted to make a deal with him. We didn't. We beat him. And then let's look at the 1970s. 1970s were worse than today. We were the sick man of Europe. Our houses had electricity cuts all the time. I remember my house full of candles. I remember my mum not being able to buy potatoes, but only could buy them this big because that's all that was available.
Yeah.
Bodies not being buried, streets, refuge being piled up in mountains.
Yeah.
It was worse than it is now.
Yeah.
And you know what? A leader came through and we changed it. We've been in worse situations.
Thatcher was bloody impressive. When you look back at what she said, she was...
It only seems terrible is because we're living through it.
Yeah.
When the history books are written of this period in time, it will not be deemed as terrible as we feel it is now. It's just that we're living through it.
I think there is. I really understand your point. I think there is something different, or maybe you disagree, about the current situation where I'm similar. I don't quite know exactly what age you are. It doesn't particularly matter, but I'm not dissimilar sort of age.
Yeah.
But I remember that sort of time. Well, that was a real zero bullshit. I mean, it might have gone off the rails, but that was a real zero bullshit type time as well. In terms of being, you know, harsh parenting, you know, told you're fat, lose weight type straightforwardness, and all of the things that are, you know, and you know, truthful, let's say, that sorted things out. I think we're in a different situation where those sorts of traits are not valued. So I think there's an absolute upheaval here. But I think enough is enough. I think enough is enough. We'll get to that point. So okay, great. So in terms of, you talked about letting this process happen, and that's really interesting to understand that in more detail. In terms of the things specifically, Nick, that you're doing to sort of catch the baby out the other side, what are those, just briefly in a couple of sentences or whatever?
First of all, I'm trying to build courage in the general populace, because without courage, we'll fall even further. We could even fall to a stage where it is the destruction of the country. So I'm trying to give people courage, hope, and show them that we've been in worse situations, and we're going to come through this, and there will be light at the end of the tunnel. So I can't have the people living in despair. So that's one thing. The second thing is I'm already floating out the solutions, or what I think the solutions are, because that builds confidence, that builds courage when people can see other people have ideas on this. You look at this problem sometimes and it looks too big. How are we ever going to tackle this? It's huge. It's every institution, it's all the universities. Young people hate the country, and we've got foreign invasion. You look at it and you go, what is the point of trying? My solution to this is piecemeal. Let's look at these problems individually. Let's drill down what actually is the problem, and how can we have solutions to these problems? And then if we can find solutions to that, that means the solutions to this. So I'm trying to give people my ideas, my solutions of what we need to start doing once we get in control, which is when we hit rock bottom. And I'm just floating these ideas. Other people have better ideas than me. Some of my ideas will be proven to be rubbish, but at least they're starting the conversations.
So when you talk about courage, are you doing that through your own example? Is that the main, through your own communication? And is that
through podcasts, to talking to people, to writing books. I'm writing a book at the moment which should be out by the end of the year, called England, My England. I
Great.
talk about why we're in this position, why Englishmen are to blame for everything that's wrong in this country at the moment.
Yeah.
Englishmen are to blame.
Yeah.
And then I talk about what the solutions are, what our enemies are trying to do, and what Englishmen need to do if we're going to reclaim this country and
Yeah.
fix this country.
Brilliant. That's really great. Thank you. So, I mean, it's a really interesting common link there because, and I think it's important when we have these conversations, we learn something. I've learned a lot. So thank you, Nick, from what you've been saying. I think um, giving people courage is absolutely our common denominator. So when people are shattered and they don't know what to do, that's the way people describe what I do. So that's something that I think that is probably where our professional one element of what strong element of cohesion is in our professional focus. I think it's not so much it's not the size of the opportunity. So it's not the size of the challenge that concerns me at all. In fact, it's totally my comfort zone, Nick, and I think it's probably your comfort zone as well. Some people like those type of situations. It's the opportunity to fix it, right? So I've been involved in a lot of things, sizable projects in the UK. I'm not saying I'm in any sort of panacea either, but I just see consistently the wrong people getting the wrong positions, and that from a simple cultural perspective, people talk about what's your cultural fit with the Starmer government. You want to work for fix this problem. Well, what's your fit with Starmer? You know, and all of a sudden, so it creates this sort of catch-22 cultural situation. So I think it's more around, and I know a lot of good people in my space. I know a lot of turnaround, heavy duty turnaround people, chief execs, really heavy hitting, straightforward people who don't have the opportunities, Nick, to do what we're talking about. So I think that's my concern with that, and I'll just park that. But I think courage, absolutely, and I use humour as well. I think humour is very important to break down barriers, and I use humour at my cost often as well. But I think, yeah, I think the point you make is absolutely right. I think we just need to get ourselves. I like your logic of let it happen. We just need to make sure that when it does happen, the opportunities are there for the right people to pick up this baby and sort of sort it out, not with a similar sort of Starmer type arrogance whatsoever. In fact, completely opposite, with a lot of humility and a lot of love and a lot of grace, because this is where I mean, in terms of I do I run masterclasses and company turnaround for MBA programs, Nick, and I talk about the most countercultural, counterintuitive traits of grace and love. Because when I arrived in a company turnaround, things have really gone bad. I mean, like this fraud, really, all kinds of stuff has happened, and I have an amnesty. I say, look, the only mistake you can make is not tell me anything. If you store stuff up and not tell me, I'll fire you, right, instantly.
Yeah.
And secondly, so I get people. I'm sure you're the same. I develop trust with people that somehow that people will just become truthful from the word go. And then I start putting things back together. But I talk about grace and love, and grace is the ability to put all of the stuff in the past. So there's a lot of, in my view, bad things, and we have to be able to put those things in the past. And then it's about giving people the love to put it back together, and the respect. So giving you, me, other people opportunities, and the people that are working around us opportunities to fix this stuff. Which sort of does full circle, because those are Christian traits.
Yeah, I do something similar, which is I don't look or speak about people as my enemies, as evil, because those people are my fellow citizens.
Yeah.
And when we turn the country around, how is there a place for them to turn when we turn the country around? If I think they're my enemy or they're evil, they're not. They're just misinformed.
Yeah.
And we need them on board.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be vindictive. No. I don't want to penalize the socialists, the Marxists, the communists, because they're my fellow citizens if they live in this country. Same with the Muslim community. I know many Muslim people who want the same as I want.
Yeah, I know. I've got a lot of.
They're the voices we need to be shouting about, so they then can help the misguided in their community, because we need to coalesce And
You
this
know,
isn't a battle. This isn't a war. I don't want a civil war in my country. I
no.
want us to coalesce and improve.
Yeah, we need to have unity. I mean, the other thing is simplicity. I like your statement around what's best for Britain or what's successful Britain.
Mm,
That's a good unifying statement. I in a turnaround, I very often just create some simple. I've run, I've turned around quite big businesses based on one metric, which is back orders, for
mm,
example. And that if you get it gives everybody a focus. And I think um, there's something simple like that which really helps to get people's heads in the right place. But it's also the other thing which I notice, and not from you, but from well-meaning people, is people. It's very easy to put fuel on the fire inadvertently by labeling other people. The same as the wokies, just labeling other people as being evil. Very
mm,
important not to do that,
mm.
because it's very easy to fall into the same Starmer type trap, but just use other labels. In fact, the fact
Exactly.
we talk to anti-Britishness is maybe inflammatory label as well, because that's a negative generalization. So it's just about becoming aware of this dialogue. But
Yeah. And
that's
if we label people evil, then it becomes easier to abuse them, because what you do with
yeah,
evil, you stamp it out, you try to kill it. Of course, you do that to evil. So calling people evil is the first step yourself to becoming what you say you're against.
yeah. Well, it's also scapegoating, isn't it? It's the
Mm,
reason. That's the reason why people get killed. That's the reason why that person in Munich, when I kicked this talk off, has been arrested with a firearm.
mm,
For because it's about that scapegoating. It's the dialogue that because Hitler didn't start by sort of saying the Jews are evil. He started by blaming them um, the demise, the bankers, the demise of Germany, and then
mm,
escalated that. Then they became subhuman. So it's bit
mm,
by bit by bit. So it's cumulative lies, ideological lies, which cause eventually make people very angry, scapegoat, and then they get terrorized
mm,
and attacked.
mm.
But Nick, let's leave it there, my friend. It's great to speak to you. Let's
And you,
next time round, let's try and get heads around Britishness, whatever that is.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Be good fun.
Yeah.
God bless you, man. It's good to see you.
And you,
Cheers.
cheers.
Bye. Bye.